And I just wanted to make points about the green leases that currently the Kenya Green Building Society is coming up with standards for green leases. And we're also looking into the fact that whether we start with a memorandum of understanding, especially for buildings which are already in operation, but now want to integrate green leases. So the softer route could be a memorandum of understanding and then later on mature into a green lease. And then also the standards for the green lease. So once they are ready, we'll be sharing them with the market. So back to my session. It's about innovative, efficient water and waste management. But we also have a panelist here with us who will be talking about solar photovoltaics. So not to steal the thunder away from my panelists, I'll ask them to introduce themselves again and what they're currently doing in their respective sectors.
My name is Loki. I'm an architect. I practice with the Planning Systems Services Limited. Planning is one of the largest practices in the region, and it's sort of renowned for some of the earlier buildings like Andem Bank, Kenyatta Avenue, Raim Tula Towers, Feather Towers, Londro. Pretty much of the high-rise buildings of the 90s and early 2000s, as well as the newer buildings like Kenya Commercial Bank headquarters in Upper Hill, just across the road, Roslyn Shopping Mall, Karen Waterfront, Surrey Center. So we do a lot. We are one of the largest practices in the region.
My name is Moses Banturaki. I'm Managing Director for Danish Cleantech Group, which is a renewable energy firm. Specific interest for today is going to be solar PV, which I'll be sharing with you guys. But most importantly for us is the transformation we've seen over the last 5 years, where we had investments with paybacks typically of 8 to 9 years, and that has now fallen in the region between 3 and 5 years. We think that's a very interesting discussion to have, especially when we're talking about efficient buildings.
My name is Janet Ruto. Work with Bamburi Cement and a department called Geocycle. Geocycle is a waste management company. I'm saying company because it's owned by Lafarge Holcim, which is the same company that owns Bamburi. But here in Kenya, we are still under the umbrella of Bamburi Cement. So basically what we do is waste management. So we take your waste and transform it into energy and use it at our kilns.
How do we tame waste and wastage and see our ROI through taming waste and wastage? So when we go back to that, I'd like to send a question to Michael. Michael, you are an architect, but fine, I want to engage you on efficient water management. How do you tame efficiency in water management? What kind of strategies do you normally put in place so that you get water efficiency and at the same time you realize ROI on a project?
Water is an interesting subject. I'm not a water specialist. I'm an architect, so buildings happen to pretty much consume a lot of the water on this planet, and it's a critical element that we deal with every day. But if you look at water, we're talking of only 3% of the planet's water being fresh water. So it will always be a scarce resource, however you look at it. Actually, out of the 3%, 2/3 of it is stuck in glaciers. So it's a very small amount of fresh water that we are all struggling to have. And whichever region you are from, there will always be areas where water is scarce. So. And then buildings come in, and much of the percentage of water used now is actually from buildings. And the problem is we just use the water, and then it's probably just go through a pipe system. It comes into your building through a pipe system and goes out as waste through a pipe system. So it's just passing through, pretty much leaving our ground dry, less recharge on aquifers, and less flow on our streams or rivers. So there's that makes it very important that we look at water is an important element in sustainability. Now, in buildings, we're looking at indoor water use, outdoor water use. Indoor water use, I won't go into the details of what it is that you need to do. I think much of that, it's sort of commonplace, but definitely we're looking at efficient appliances, processes, fixtures. That's standard, you got to use that. Then you go to recycle or reuse as much water as you can. Outdoors, you got to use a lot of native plant material so that you reduce your irrigation water levels. So there is not, a combination of all that really does give you sort of sustainable solutions to water in buildings.
Moses.
Yes, John.
When we talk about energy, efficiency is never far away. And of course, even the word optimization always features. So through the installation of solar photovoltaic panels, how do you get efficiency in terms of energy, or how do you look at it? Please give us some explanation on that. There's
a lot of stress, and I think most of that stress is manifested in the bill you get from KPLC, for instance. It's all these things. It's the generation mix we have, hydro, which is a hostage to climate conditions, and thermal, which is powered by generators. Kenya is a net importer of petroleum products. So all those things contribute to cost. So it is clear to us, and I hope to everyone in this room, that that matter must be addressed. The issue of energy must be addressed. And we feel that there is no question alternatives must be sought. But in our view, the alternatives must also be sustainable, or else you'll end up at the same place you're trying to run away from. And that's why we come in, because we're in the space of solar energy. We think it's a sustainable source of energy. But those are the issues. So our vision is would like to tell all our prospects, let the sun pay your bills, okay? But there are obstacles to that. And 5 years, like I said in the beginning, 5 years ago when we started out here in East Africa, solar was expensive. Solar was expensive, and in two ways. It had reputational issues. It was built mainly with batteries. So there's these two objections that kept on coming up. One was technology risk. Does it work? Second was a financial risk. Can I afford it? Okay, and just to touch on those briefly, I know we don't have a lot of time. When you look at the reputational risks, the engineering wasn't done right in many cases. Work was shoddy, and when that happens and the plants fail, it is the technology that suffers. Solar doesn't work. It doesn't matter that the workmanship was bad, it just doesn't work. And you got batteries in this part of the world, because of the comparatively high temperatures we have, don't last for long. So when you're investing in old solar technology, which is battery backed up, you not only have a problem with acquisition, you also have a problem with running costs. You have to replace batteries every 3 to 5 years. Over a 25-year period that a solar plant will give you, you're spending quite a lot. And just to give you a figure to work with, if you invested in a $1 million solar plant, you would need batteries worth $1 million. Only problems, you have to replace them every 5 years. Okay, so wow. Financial issues, technology issues, and of course, we could go into issues of regulations, but the people from government touched upon them, and what is being done. In some other countries, government is actually making it profitable for people who would like to invest in solar. So we're moving from the issues. We really need to get an alternative source, but the source that we feel fits into this area has a history of poor performance, if I may put it that way. So a company then decided to move into this space and address those key issues. And what we did basically was take the batteries and throw them out of the equation, and start building plants that are grid-tied, and synchronize them with what you get from the grid and genset that you use as backup. Seamless transfer between all those sources, but also matters like re-engineering your processes to make sure that you're doing most of your production during the day. When the sun goes down, you go back to KPLC, no problem. It brings its own challenges, of course. What happens when power spills back to the grid? Because you can't turn off the sun. You know, what happens when power spills off the grid? Maybe KPLC has turned off the grid for maintenance, but your sun plant is still producing. So we have to come up with all these limiters in our inverters that shut down the plant when the frequency from the main grid is not being received, or reduces production to the bare minimum at when it's a public holiday or weekend. So for us, dimensioning is important. A skill set was important. We invested a lot in training and being able to create a solution that is affordable. And then to add to that, the issue of sourcing as well. 5 years ago, it took us around anywhere between 15 to 17 Kenya shillings to produce a watt of solar electricity. Today, due to improved sourcing, due to falling world prices, it costs us, we can produce a unit of solar energy for 9 shillings. Now, you need to compare that against what KPLC charges you, which is an average of 15 shillings, to see that investing in solar is now it's sustainable in more ways than one.
Okay.
Financially, to answer your question, and also from the softer issues that we talked about in the beginning. And this is how we feel we've been able to move from that area where solar wasn't a very good, viable investment to where we feel right now it is. I think we need to address the stresses that are manifesting themselves in the bills that we receive. And our mix is completely wrong. Our generational mix as a country is completely wrong. I think we should start to see more and more independent power producers, but dealing in sustainable energy. That will save us from importing from Uganda, which is very expensive, from relying on diesel generators, which is expensive and bad for the environment, and things like that.
And Janet, we were having a casual conversation, and you told me that waste is about not getting 100% from a resource. So essentially, when we look around, right, when you talk about properties, we look at the entire life cycle, right from construction, operation and maintenance, and eventually the decommissioning or demolish or renovating. So at each and every stage, we generate waste, but we hardly talk about this waste. So now, please, give us a 50,000 picture view of the waste that we generate currently in Nairobi and maybe in Kenya. And then maybe you can give us some ideas where we can actually help tame this waste so that we can realize some return on investment on what we are initially considering as waste, but yet it's not using everything from the resources that come into our properties or whatever it is. It's
quite unfortunate because we produce up to 4 million tons of waste every year in Kenya. This is according to the study that was done by World Bank. And globally, we see that we have up to 4 billion tons of waste. So what can we do with this waste? So there are different ways that this waste can be used. We have like 10%, which goes for landfilling. We have 15% that goes for incineration. And we have co-processing, which forms like 15%. It falls under others. So we have co-processing. Okay, when you look at how you can be able to dispose waste, co-processing becomes one of the best ways you can dispose. I'll give you the reasons why later. But looking at the construction industries, it was quite interesting to be here, and I didn't quite pick the issue of waste when it comes to green energy with everything that was talked about. And I'm thinking, if we are going to talk about green building, can it be green building from the beginning of construction to the end? Does it have to mean that after I've given you this beautiful building, which is green, it ends there after I've given you the property? Or does it have to continue even with the waste management, with the water management, you know? So how can we incorporate the waste management in all this green building? And we look at some of the waste that comes from the construction industries. And I think most of the people who are here are experts, and you quite understand what happens. Let's say the cement bags, which forms a big part of the waste that comes from there. Do we know that you can recycle those bags and get money actually from it? We have maybe plastics, we have metals. Do you know that we can recycle? We have less than 20 companies that are licensed by NEMA to do plastic recycling. Can we invest and get more companies to recycle these plastics so that we reduce the waste that we have and we recycle before we go to the last stage, which means co-processing or turning it into energy, as we are doing in Bamburi?
Currently, I'm working on a green certified project, which is currently under construction stage. And at this moment, that's 8 months down the line, we are currently diverting 100% of all the waste. I hope I can keep the trend, but you can see that there's been plenty of wastage out of what was, we are looking at it as waste, but this apparently has been raw materials for other people, other industries, and some of those industries are actually in the construction phase. And construction companies also spend a lot of money just disposing it off, paying fees to have it taken to the landfills and all that. But then when you flip it on the other side and see it as a resource, what you can actually do is that you can be able to look at it as recyclables. You can see them as resource for another industry, and you can divert them to that industry. And currently, like I said, we are looking at 100%, so which means it's highly and very possible. So in other words, that's a money earner for the construction phase. But then this also goes beyond just the construction phase, but then also goes into the occupation and operational stage. And I think I'm gonna throw the question back to you. What kind of practices have you seen that are actually beneficial during the operation and occupancy stage? I know recycling or separation of waste is one thing that's being encouraged, but I don't know, and I don't really have all the statistics on how it's being practiced. I don't know whether you can share with us some of those statistics on the percentages of how much waste is being recycled currently in Kenya, and what can you suggest, based on what you've seen, that this can be the way forward that can also help save buildings and get them some money in the process?
We have less than 50% that goes for recycling, and others just go to the dump site. Actually, it's unfortunate that also in Kenya we don't even have a proper landfill. So what happens to the other waste that comes, that is just there? I'll go back to some of the panelists that were here, and I think Nick spoke about the straws that comes from the wheat and all that. That's a very good example of how we can use some of these materials to put into proper use as opposed to open burning. This comes with a study that we did in Mwea. We went to Mwea, we saw they had an issue with space. Why? Because of the husks that come when they do the milling of the rice husk. So you find that they have heaps and heaps of rice husk, which they can't do anything with it. So we thought, what is the best way we can work with the locals and provide them with a better solution? And that's when we decided to use them as part of the alternative fuel. So we reduced our fossil fuel by up to 70% of our plant in Mombasa by using the rice husk. This actually brings in the employment of the youth, the cleaning of the environment, because they used to do open burning. So it's just to look at what is currently out there and see what solution can you offer to them. It might be so simple as just taking it as loose, because we got proposal from some of the companies where they want to bring as briquettes. But you see, when you talk about briquettes, it means that you have to use energy to produce that briquette. Why don't you just take it as loose as it is? So those are some of the ways that you can just look at them and see how you can reuse. But on the statistics of the I don't have the figures of it, but I can get them.
What advice could you have to a developer or a property owner or a project manager? Let's say you identify some efficient water management solutions which they are averse to because they feel like they will add a cost, especially the first cost during the construction stage. What advice could you have for them?
The interesting thing about our market is, if you look at the last 10 years and coming out of 5, everyone is complaining about flooding every time it rains. And it's not because we all of a sudden started getting more rain. It's because of the development that's sort of coming up and the way people approach water pretty much and design with water in our developments. Water, and specifically stormwater, is perhaps one of the biggest resources you can have as a developer. But everyone just channels this out of their development and no one wants it to be sort of the city council of Nairobi's problem, the county council of Mombasa's problem. No one wants to look at it as something interesting. If you look, there are a couple of slides that we're going through on the screen, and two projects that planning has worked on in the past, which I think are very interesting. And one was worked on a while back, completed early 80s, exactly what's on the screen now, is a residential sort of development in Spring Valley, 60 acres of land with 88 units. Very poorly drained soil, bad site, the kind of sites that just no one wants to touch. But the approach here was to look at that actually as a good thing, and you take advantage of it. And the whole development was actually designed around water management, and actually got the name from that Lakeview Estate. It's all because it was all designed to have this lake sort of centrally placed at the lowest end of the site, and what that does, it gets all the stormwater from the roofs of the buildings and from the driveways, and you have this sort of reservoir that has a lot of water. It's 3.5 acres of lake. I'll talk about how that sort of works out in terms of sort of the returns, but the sort of benefit we were able to get from such is you end up with the units around the lake selling, say, 2 times the price is compared to the prices of the other units that are not around the lake, and that way you're able to pay for the lake. The lake at the moment, residents use it for recreative activities, because some guys living around the lake have boats and what have you. There are some very rare species of fish that are sort of birds, and pretty much ends up being just more than just a sort of stormwater management feature within the estate. It also encourages wildlife, and actually also becomes sort of it's an aesthetic feature to a point where everyone wants a house around the lake, and that raised the value of the property. The other project that we worked on along the same concept, what is on the screen now, that's the Karen Waterfront shopping mall. Karen, the flat areas in Karen can be very difficult, because you have these areas where it's all black cotton soil, poorly drained, and basically no one wants you to drain your stormwater through the land. So you basically have to find a way of looking at it. And we've had projects that have some very complicated systems of tunnel systems, trying to get your water into council systems. What we did here is similar to that, but sort of this more sort of more modern intervention. The lake at Karen Waterfront is 3.5 acres as well. The land is 50 acres. And looking at that, we were able to actually come up with this water reservoir that first we manage the stormwater within the site, but also all the treated water from the building, because we are fully recycling water in the shopping mall. All that water goes into the lake. Now what happens is, this water, the depth of the lake is about 3 to 3.5 meters. So we're talking about 45,000 cubic meters of water. That's a lot of water. Out of that, we agreed we can only use about 7,000 cubic meters without losing other sort of aesthetic, water sports, because you still need a lot of water. Now, 7,000 cubic meters is a lot of water. So all the wastewater from the building treated, it put within the lake for pretty much storage, and all the gray water used in the building comes from the lake. So basically, there are filtration systems that we're getting the water from there. Firefighting water is all stored within the lake. And you end up with a development that is all developed around stormwater drainage. No, we are not taking any sort of using council systems to drain our stormwater. All the water is managed in the site, but actually the client, the developers are actually going to make a lot of money out of this. Sort of what would have been a waste. No one would want it to work with. But you have this now sort of a lake, and it becomes current waterfront. And that the whole development takes that sort of as a theme and a sort of a strong point of marketing. How many shopping malls do you have? Sort of the 3.5 sort of acre a water feature. For many developers, the question is always, then how on earth am I going to give 3.5 acres of land in Karen for water? Because that's 350 million if you look at current selling prices in Karen. But then if you look at the development requirements and control and sort of planning requirements in Nairobi, that site we're only allowed to build 35%. So we have a 35% plot coverage. You're not going to use the 75% of the land anyway for building. 65% of the land for building anyway. So how then do you creatively make money out of this sort of open space? You've done your parking, you've done your plant material, then you have this feature that not only helps you recycle and reuse much of water, but also it's one of the best features of the development. Thank you.
What are the available financing models available for installation of solar photovoltaic? Because the question has always been the cost. So what financing models are out there that you can encourage or recommend to developers or property owners that can actually help them get sustainable properties or efficient properties?
There is, however, a lot of what we call green investment funds from development partners like AFD through their Sunroof program and the Danidas, the NORADs of this world that will actually lend you money at cheap money as long as you're going to invest in green energy.
How cheap?
We're talking right now anywhere between, after you're vetted of course, anywhere between 5 and 6% on the dollar. But we are working on a project in Uganda that has been approved for 2.9% on the dollar. So it's a number of issues that they go through that will take us.
Let me just cut it short. What made it be considered for 2.9 million per dollar?
It's the scale, roofings.
Okay.
Roofings is a very huge steel manufacturer in Uganda. It's a sheer scale, the money and how green their project is.
So basically it was the scale that enabled them to get it at that lower rate.
Yes.
Now tell me, for example, for a building which doesn't have that scale, what can be the implications?
It's quite challenging in the building, in the home area space. It's quite challenging for us because where we exist and where we have noted some successes is in the industrial and the institutional space because of scale, right? Okay. Home area, the only way I believe we can start to achieve scale is if we go into estates and satellite cities. And we saw some pictures yesterday in yesterday's presentations of what they are doing in the Philippines and all these places. I think we should be taking that direction now. If not for only the issue of scale, because then we should consider that the cost of power in homes is actually much higher than you pay in industries, for instance. The average in Kenya is 15 shillings per unit, but in homes, in domestic spaces, you're paying close to 20, right? So we need to start clustering. We need to start thinking about homes not as standalone units, but as whole estates and whole blocks of flats and satellite cities. And we see that happening, and I think the tattoos of these worlds and the proposed Northlands are actually going to be green cities because they're going to invest in solar. So we can't do anything about that right now, but I think we can start to have that discussion. But even then, I just need to say this, John, even then, even without scale, the basic fact is that a unit of solar can be produced at 9 shillings right now, even allowing for financing. And a unit from KPLC is anywhere above 15 shillings. So it is, I think we have, as a society, as a group, as a collection of professionals, we have a big job to educate the market. Sometimes I feel the market is not that aware about these alternatives and how much they cost. Basically, our basic sales pitch is, we're not asking you to look for more money. We're just saying, give us part of what you pay to KPLC and invest in green energy. I mean, it's all paid out of your savings. There's a lot to save by getting onto solar energy, as long as you don't buy it with batteries. That's very important.
Janet, we've seen that I think the best way to get more out of waste is to segregate and separate the waste. But I think that's not a practice which is commonly with us, especially even for the high-end and what we call efficient properties, and that's the direction they are supposed to be taking as we speak. What's the level of education or sensitization or awareness out there, and what's actually not being done so that we may get to that level? And whom do you believe will have the major impact in order to advance us into that direction?
I think the people who really can advocate for segregation of waste has to start with me as a person, or us who are here. What do we do to segregate this waste? Because we know we are supposed to dispose. We have recyclables, which are plastics, metallic, and all that. It has to start from the source. Unfortunately, you find that most organizations do the segregation at the source, but when the collection time comes, everything is put together. So you're taken back to zero. So it has to start with us. It has to start with the people who are collecting the waste, so that probably you can even have different days for different waste. You can have plastics on Monday, Tuesday metallic, so that you don't have the mix-up. I'll talk about the industries, because so far I've worked very well with the industries, the big industries, manufacturers. And what we do, we provide the services even at source. So we do the segregation at source. Then when it comes to time of collection, we are the ones who know what is supposed to be collected. So let's see, if we're talking about the construction industries, us or the developers are supposed to provide, let's say we have the bins that you can do the segregation there. And then they work with the waste management companies or consultants to make sure that the waste are segregated well and they're collected well and disposed well. Because remember, at the end of the day, you as the producer of the waste, you're responsible for that waste. So if that waste is found at Dandora, it's your reputation that is at stake. I remember sometimes back in Bamburi, we had this initiative where we were paying those guys who pick, and we were paying them some few coins when they bring for us the bag, when they bring back the bags. And that gave us an opportunity to make sure that we are recycling our bags, so that our bags, they're just not found anywhere. So me, as a producer of that waste, I have the obligation to make sure that the waste is disposed properly. We need these sessions, more of these sessions, to make people aware of other alternative of waste management that is out there. Yesterday, I was just having a conversation with Chandaria, and they were telling me they are recycling waste. They take the white matter and they recycle and make all those materials that they make, like tissues and the likes. So this information, we have people who are providing these services, but the information is not out. So it's sometimes we depend on the forums to air out the services that we offer, to make people aware of what we are offering. We also work hand in hand with for us guys, we work with NEMA to make sure that the awareness is out, even when they are going to industries and making sure that everything is followed in terms of waste management, and then they can tell them where they can take the waste. We had a project that we were working on with them back in 2012 on waste tire management. So we were trying to get a regulation to make sure that all the waste tires is being disposed well. We were there in the association as off-takers of the tires, and unfortunately, up to now, it has not passed. But as off-takers, we are still collecting the tires and we are disposing. With the study that was done back in 2012, we found that we have around 50,000 tons of tires that are produced yearly, and you find only 7,000 comes to Bamburi. So you can see we have a gap of 43,000 tons. Where do we take that? So if we have many other companies that can find a better way of using this waste, then we can have a better environment.
We've talked about very efficient water, waste, and of course, we've talked about renewable energy. When we talk about sustainable properties, sustainable properties look at all these three categories. Whichever rating tool you will look at, whether you're looking at IFC's age, whether you're looking at LEED's tool, or whether you're looking at the Green Star Africa, Kenya that we have here, all these tools actually look at these three categories, and they look at the optimization through these three categories because they believe that you will get some proper return on investment on these three categories. So I'd like to end it there, but prior to that, I think if there are any questions to the panelists or to myself, because I'm also seated here, please go ahead and shoot. All right. That's it. Thank you so much for listening in. We appreciate it.